A young girl named Lily had always been quiet and shy, the kind of person who preferred to let her piano do the talking. She grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other, and her dream was simple. She wanted to make music that touched hearts. Her parents were ordinary people who worked hard every day, and they believed in her talent even when others did not. They saved every little bit of money to buy her a second-hand piano, slightly old but still beautiful to her eyes. From that day, the piano became her world. Lily would sit for hours playing soft tunes, sometimes repeating the same melody over and over until it felt perfect. The neighbors would often pause outside her window just to listen. They would smile and whisper to each other about how gifted she was, but Lily was not confident about herself. She always thought she was not good enough, especially when it came to performing in front of others. When she turned 16, she joined a local music academy that was known for training young talents for big competitions. The academy was run by Mr. Carter, a man with sharp eyes and a voice that could silence a room. He was respected by everyone, but he was also feared. He believed that success only came through discipline and strict control. Many students had left the academy because they could not handle his harsh words, but those who stayed knew that if they could please him, they might have a chance to reach their dreams. Lily's first day at the academy was full of nerves. She carried her sheet music carefully in her arms and walked into the big hall where other students were already practicing. The sound of different instruments filled the air. Some were confident and loud, while others struggled to keep up with the rhythm. Mr. Carter stood in the middle holding a clipboard and watching everyone closely. When it was Lily's turn to play, she sat at the piano and took a deep breath. Her fingers trembled as they touched the keys. The melody she played was beautiful but gentle, almost too soft for such a large hall. When she finished, there was a short silence before Mr. Carter spoke. He said her playing was full of feeling, but too weak, too careful. He told her that she needed more control and power if she ever wanted to stand on a real stage. His words cut deep, but Lily just nodded and thanked him. From that day, her life changed. She practiced longer than ever before. She would wake up early, practice before school, and then stay late at the academy after everyone had gone home. Mr. Carter noticed her effort but rarely praised her. Sometimes he would stop her mid-performance and tell her she was wasting time playing with emotions. "Music is about precision, not feelings," he often said. But Lily didn't agree deep down. For her, music was emotion itself. It was the only way she could speak without fear. Weeks turned into months, and slowly she began to improve. Her fingers became faster, her timing sharper. Yet, every time she looked at Mr. Carter's face, she saw the same disapproval. He would find small mistakes and point them out without hesitation. Once he told her she should think about quitting if she couldn't handle pressure. She went home that night and cried quietly, not because of his words, but because she was afraid he might be right. But when she looked at her piano, she felt a strange strength returning. Her parents encouraged her to keep going. Her father told her that every person who ever achieved something great had been doubted at some point. Her mother would sit beside her during practice, sometimes knitting, sometimes just listening. They didn't understand all the musical terms, but they understood her heart. And that gave Lily the courage to face another day. Mr. Carter's Academy soon announced a big event, a national music competition that would be held in the city. Only the best students from each academy would be allowed to perform. The news spread quickly, and the entire class was buzzing with excitement. Everyone wanted a chance to represent the academy. Mr. Carter made it clear that he expected only perfection. He said that whoever would perform had to prove not just skill but discipline. Lily knew this was her chance, yet she also knew that Mr. Carter probably didn't believe she was ready. Still, she practiced harder than ever. Her piano became her closest friend, and sometimes she spoke to it as if it could understand. She told it about her fears, her dreams, and how badly she wanted to make everyone proud. Every key she touched carried a piece of her hope. During the first audition round, students played one by one while Mr. Carter and two assistant judges watched from the back. When Lily's turn came, she walked to the piano slowly, trying not to look nervous. Her heart pounded, but she remembered her father's words, wanted to play from her soul. The piece she chose was one she had practiced for months, full of emotion but also technically challenging. When she began, her fingers moved like flowing water. The melody filled the hall, soft at first, then rising with strength. For the first time, she didn't worry about being perfect, she just played what she felt. When she finished, there was silence, followed by quiet applause from a few students. Mr. Carter looked at her with a thoughtful expression. He didn't smile, but he didn't criticize either. He only nodded slightly and wrote something on his clipboard. That tiny gesture meant more to her than words. A few days later, the results were announced. Lily's name was at the top of the list. She could hardly believe it. The other students congratulated her, some with real smiles, others with jealousy. For the first time, she felt like maybe she belonged there. Her parents were overjoyed, and even her younger brother kept telling everyone in town that his sister was going to perform in a big city competition. But not everything was as bright as it seemed. Mr. Carter continued to train her harder than anyone else. He corrected her every move, every breath. If her hand shook, he told her she lacked control. If she played with emotion, he said she was losing focus. Sometimes she wondered if he even liked music, or if it was only a test of control for him. Still, she listened and followed every instruction, believing that maybe he saw potential in her that she couldn't see herself. As the competition day drew near, tension filled the academy. Mr. Carter wanted his team to win at all costs. He had spent years building his reputation, and he didn't want any weakness on stage. Lily felt the pressure growing heavier with each passing day. Sometimes, she stayed in the practice room alone, long after midnight. The janitor would find her there, still playing under the dim lights, eyes tired but determined. One evening, Mr. Carter walked in while she was practicing. He stood silently behind her, watching as she repeated a difficult passage again and again. After a while, he told her to stop. He asked her why she played so emotionally when he had told her many times not to. Lily hesitated and then said softly that she didn't know how to play without feeling. It was part of her. Mr. Carter looked at her for a moment, then said that emotions make people weak. That words stayed with her all night. Later, when she was home, she thought deeply about what he said. She didn't agree, but she also didn't want to disappoint him. She wanted his approval, even if it meant hiding a part of herself. But deep inside, she knew that when the time came, she would have to play in her own way no matter what. The night before the competition, she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept running through every note, every movement. Her hands shook slightly, as she imagined standing on that big stage with hundreds of people watching. She prayed silently, not for victory, but for courage. She wanted to prove that she was not weak, that she was capable of more than Mr. Carter believed. The next morning, as she dressed for the event, her parents hugged her and wished her luck. Her mother told her to remember that the music belonged to her heart, not to anyone else's rules. Those words made her smile. When she reached the academy, the other students were already preparing. Mr. Carter was there too, giving last-minute instructions, his face serious as always. When he saw Lily, he gave her a small nod, telling her to stay calm and focused. As they boarded the bus to the competition hall, Lily looked out the window, watching the city pass by. She could see her reflection in the glass, nervous but hopeful. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She was ready to give everything she had for that one performance. The bus stopped near the concert hall, a grand building filled with bright lights and banners. As she stepped inside, she could feel the energy, the excitement, the whispers of the audience. The smell of polished wood and new instruments filled the air. Her heart raced, but she reminded herself that every great musician once stood in her place, trembling before the world. She didn't know that within a few hours her life would change completely. She looked around and saw Mr. Carter talking to the organizers. His expression was unreadable, for now she could only wait for her turn. She sat quietly, holding her sheet music close, unaware that soon she would face her greatest test, not just as a pianist, but as someone who believed in the power of her own voice through music. That was the beginning of everything. The calm before the storm that would reveal who she truly was and what her music could do to those who doubted her. The morning sun shone through the tall glass windows of the academy, painting the piano hall with soft golden light. Lily arrived early, as she always did, carrying her sheet music and a small notebook where she wrote her practice notes. The competition was now only a few weeks away, and every day felt more important than the last. Her steps echoed on the wooden floor as she entered the quiet hall. The piano waited at the center like an old friend, polished and shining, and she smiled, faintly before sitting down to begin her practice. She took a deep breath and started to play. The melody she chose that morning was gentle at first, then stronger, flowing like waves that carried her thoughts. It was the piece she had chosen for the competition, one that spoke about hope and courage. She had practiced it so many times that her fingers moved without hesitation. But even as the notes filled the air, a small voice inside her kept whispering that it might not be enough. She had seen the other students, some confident, some loud, all trying to impress Mr. Carter. He demanded perfection, and to him, mistakes were not allowed. When Mr. Carter entered the hall, his sharp footsteps interrupted the sound. He walked straight to the piano and stood behind her, listening without saying a word. Lily kept playing, pretending she didn't notice, but she could feel his eyes on her hands. When she finished, she turned around slowly. Mr. Carter didn't smile. He just said she was improving, but her emotions still controlled her more than her technique. He told her that feelings could destroy focus in a competition. Lily nodded politely, though deep down she disagreed. She wanted to tell him that emotions were what made her music alive, but she didn't dare. After he left, she sat quietly for a moment, staring at the keys. Sometimes she felt that she and Mr. Carter lived in two different worlds. For him, music was about control and rules. For her, it was about heart and connection. She respected him deeply but wished he could understand her way of seeing music. Still, she continued to practice under his instructions because she wanted to prove she could be strong and disciplined too. That afternoon, the academy hall buzzed with energy. The students were gathering for the official announcement of the national competition participants. Everyone whispered and speculated who would represent the academy. Mr. Carter entered with a folder in his hands and called everyone to attention. He spoke firmly, saying the academy's reputation depended on this performance and that only the best would be chosen. He started reading the names, and each one brought cheers or disappointment. When he finally read Lily's name for the solo piano category, the room fell silent for a moment before breaking into soft applause. Lily froze. She didn't know whether to smile or cry. It felt like a dream. Mr. Carter looked at her briefly and said she had earned the spot, but he also warned her that this was just the beginning. He reminded everyone that a true performer is only as good as their last show. His words sounded harsh, but Lily took them as motivation. After the meeting, her friends congratulated her. Some were genuinely happy, while others whispered quietly that she was just lucky. Lily didn't pay much attention to that. She was already thinking about what lay ahead. She knew this was her chance to show who she was, not only to the audience, but to her teacher as well. When she reached home that evening, her parents were waiting at the door. She told them the news, and their faces lit up with pride. Her mother hugged her tightly, and her father patted her shoulder, saying he always knew she would do something special. They decided to celebrate with her favorite meal that night. Simple, food but full of warmth. During dinner, they talked about how big the competition was and how many people would be watching. Lily felt nervous hearing it, but her father reminded her that no matter how big the crowd, she only needed to focus on her piano. Her mother said the same thing she always did, that her music came from her heart, and that was what made it beautiful. After dinner, Lily went to her room, sat at her small desk, and wrote in her notebook. She wrote about her dreams, her fears, and what she wanted to feel on stage. She promised herself that no matter what Mr. Carter said, she would never lose her emotions when she played. They were what made her who she was. The following days were long and exhausting. Mr. Carter became stricter than ever. He would stop her mid-performance to point out small mistakes, sometimes even repeating the same bar 20 times until it sounded perfect to him. Precision first, passion later, he would say. He didn't mean to be cruel, but his way of teaching was heavy and demanding. Lily sometimes went home so tired that she could barely lift her hands. But she didn't give up. There were days when she felt she couldn't keep going. Once, after a particularly harsh practice, she went to the park near the academy and sat on a bench. It was late evening, and the air was cool. She could still hear his voice in her head telling her that she was not strong enough for the competition. Tears filled her eyes, but she wiped them quickly. A little boy passing by stopped and asked her why she was sad. She smiled and said she wasn't sad, just thinking. The boy laughed and told her his mother always said music could fix sadness. That made her smile again. When the boy left, she sat quietly and thought about what he said. Maybe he was right. Maybe she just needed to play her music to heal her own heart first. The next morning, she arrived at the academy earlier than usual. She played the same piece she had been working on, but this time she didn't think about perfection. She thought about how it made her feel. The sound filled the room with warmth, and for the first time in days she felt free. Mr. Carter walked in midway through her practice and stood at the door listening. When she noticed him, she stopped immediately and apologized, thinking he would scold her again. But he didn't. He only said that sometimes emotion can help if it's balanced with control. Then he walked away without another word. For him, it was a rare compliment. For Lily, it meant everything. The competition day drew closer. Posters were put up around town, and the academy became busier. Students ran around preparing costumes and rehearsing their pieces. Mr. Carter arranged extra sessions and strict schedules for everyone. Lily followed every instruction but also practiced alone after hours, polishing small details. She wanted to feel completely ready. The day before the competition, Mr. Carter called her into his office. His room was simple, filled with trophies and old photographs from past students who had won awards. He told her to sit down. He said he wanted her to remember that the stage is a place for confidence, not emotions. He told her not to let her feelings take over in front of the judges. Lily listened quietly, nodding even though she still believed the opposite. He then handed her a new version of the sheet music, slightly altered with more technical parts. She looked at it and felt a wave of worry. It was harder than what she had practiced. Mr. Carter told her this new version would show her skill better, and that he trusted she could handle it. That night, Lily stayed up late practicing the new version. Her hands hurt, and her head spun from exhaustion, but she refused to stop. She wanted to prove to herself and to him that she could do it. Around midnight, she finally closed the piano lid and whispered softly to herself that tomorrow would be her day. The next morning, the sky was clear and the city was bright. Lily dressed carefully, wearing a simple white dress her mother had ironed the night before. Her parents came with her to the academy to see her off. The bus to the competition was already waiting, filled with students and instruments. Mr. Carter was standing outside checking his list. When Lily arrived, he nodded slightly and told her to stay focused and calm. The ride to the city was long, but no one talked much. Some students listened to music through their headphones, others closed their eyes to relax. Lily sat by the window, watching the scenery pass. The closer they got, the more nervous she became. She could feel her hands trembling slightly, so she held them together tightly. When they finally arrived at the concert hall, her breath caught in her chest. The building was huge, with shining marble floors and banners that read, National Youth Music Competition. People in elegant clothes moved around, carrying instruments and talking in low voices. The sound of pianos, violins, and flutes filled the air. Lily had never seen anything like it. Mr. Carter gathered everyone near the entrance and reminded them to stay composed. Then he handed out the performance schedules. Lily looked at hers and realized she would perform in the evening, right after lunch break. That gave her some time to prepare. She went to the practice room assigned to her and began warming up her fingers slowly. Every sound echoed in the small room, and for a moment, she forgot the crowd outside. When she looked through the small window of the practice room, she could see the stage where others were performing. Some played confidently, others stumbled. Mr. Carter stood near the judges' table, his arms crossed, watching every performance closely. She knew he expected nothing less than perfection from her. As the time for her turn came closer, she felt both excitement and fear. She knew that everything she had worked for led to this moment. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, whispering a silent prayer that she would play with both strength and heart. What she didn't know was that fate had something unexpected waiting for her. Just before she was about to walk on stage, Mr. Carter called her aside with a serious look. His words would change everything she had prepared for. She didn't understand why, but she could sense that something was not right, and her heart began to beat even faster. That moment was the beginning of a twist she could never have imagined, one that would test not just her skill but her spirit. The sound of applause from the hall echoed through the waiting area. Lily sat in a small chair near the backstage door, her hands resting on her lap, holding her sheet music tightly. Her heart was racing, but she kept whispering to herself that everything would be fine. The morning performances had gone well for other participants from her academy, and now it was almost her turn. This was the moment she had dreamed of for years, to play on a real stage, under real lights, in front of real judges. She had imagined it 1,000 times in her head, but now that it was about to happen, her legs felt weak. Mr. Carter stood near the entrance, speaking to one of the event organizers. His face looked tense, his usual calm replaced with worry. Lily noticed it but didn't say anything. She thought maybe he was just nervous for his students, as all the teachers were. Then suddenly, he called her name in his firm voice. She stood up quickly and walked over, expecting to hear a few last-minute instructions. He looked at her quietly for a moment before saying that there had been a small change. His tone was serious, his words slow. He said he had decided that she would not be performing the solo piece after all. Lily blinked, thinking she had heard him wrong. She asked softly what he meant. Mr. Carter explained that after watching the earlier performances and thinking about the pressure of the stage, he believed another student from the academy, David, would be a better choice for the solo piano part. He said David was more confident in front of big crowds and could handle the technical pressure better. For a few seconds, Lily didn't move. She just stared at him, her heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. She felt the world around her go silent. The sound of people talking, the music, even her own breath faded. She finally whispered that she had practiced for months, that she knew the piece by heart. But Mr. Carter only said that he appreciated her effort and that this was for the best. He told her she would still be part of the group performance later, but the solo would be done by someone else. She wanted to argue, to beg him to let her play, but her voice wouldn't come out. Her hands trembled as she tried to hold the music sheets, and they slipped to the floor. The papers scattered, and she quickly bent down to pick them up. Mr. Carter turned away, saying he needed to prepare the next performer. She watched him walk off, feeling a strange emptiness in her chest. When she returned to the waiting area, David was standing there, already dressed for his performance. He looked confident and smiled politely at her, though he seemed a little uncomfortable too. He said he didn't ask for this change, that Mr. Carter just told him to step in. Lily forced a small smile and wished him luck. Inside, she felt like crying, but she didn't want anyone to see her that way. She walked to the far end of the hall and sat alone on a bench. The lights above her flickered softly, and the distant sound of the piano reached her ears from the stage. Each note hit her like a small reminder of what she had lost. She had dreamed of that moment for so long, and now it was gone in an instant, replaced by silence. She looked at her reflection in the window beside her. Her face looked pale, and her eyes tired. For a moment she thought about leaving the hall, walking out into the city and forgetting everything. But something inside her stopped her. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was her love for the piano. She decided to stay and watch the performance. When it was David's turn, she sat in the back row of the audience. The lights dimmed, and he walked onto the stage confidently. Mr. Carter sat near the judges, his eyes fixed on the piano. David began playing the same piece that Lily had practiced for months. The opening notes sounded perfect, smooth, and precise. The judges nodded approvingly, and the audience listened quietly. But after a few minutes, something changed. His hands began to move faster, and his rhythm started to slip. A few wrong notes came out, sharp and loud. He tried to recover, but the more he focused, the more nervous he became. Lily's heart ached for him. She knew how it felt to make mistakes on stage, the pressure, the fear. The melody that was supposed to sound emotional now felt cold and rushed. The audience began to whisper softly, sensing his struggle. The judges exchanged looks. And then, halfway through the piece, David stopped. His hands froze on the keys. For a long moment, the hall was silent. Mr. Carter stood up immediately, his face pale. The boy looked helpless, his eyes wide with panic. He tried to start again, but his hands refused to move. The moment stretched painfully. Then one of the organizers walked onto the stage, whispering something to Mr. Carter. The crowd waited, restless, wondering what would happen next. Lily felt her stomach twist. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how. Then, to her surprise, Mr. Carter looked directly toward the back of the hall, right where she was sitting. Their eyes met. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his expression. He looked at her for a few seconds, then gestured for her to come forward. Lily froze in her seat. Was he really asking her to play now? After telling her she wasn't ready? Her heart pounded, and her legs felt heavy. But something inside her told her to stand up. The audience turned their heads as she slowly walked down the aisle. The whispers grew louder. Some recognized her as one of the students. Others had no idea who she was. When she reached the stage, Mr. Carter leaned close and said quietly that the piece had to be finished, and she was the only one who knew it perfectly. He told her to take a seat at the piano and do her best. His voice was low, but she could hear the nervousness behind it. She nodded without saying anything and walked toward the piano. Her hands were cold as she sat down. The lights above her were bright, almost blinding. She could see hundreds of faces staring at her, waiting. Her fingers hovered over the keys, shaking slightly. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In that moment, she remembered everything: the long nights of practice, the words of her parents, the times she doubted herself, and the sound of her teacher telling her she wasn't ready. She decided she wasn't playing to prove him wrong anymore. She was playing because she loved music. The first note came out soft and pure, then another and another. Slowly, the melody began to take shape. Her fingers moved with confidence she didn't know she had. Every sound she made carried her feelings, her pain, her dreams, her quiet strength. The audience became completely silent. Even Mr. Carter sat still, watching her with wide eyes. As the piece grew more powerful, something magical filled the room. People leaned forward, listening closely. The judges stopped writing and looked up. The sound of her music wrapped around the hall like a warm wave. It wasn't perfect in a technical sense, but it was alive, full of heart, emotion, and truth. When the last note faded, there was a moment of deep silence. Then, all at once, the hall erupted in applause. People stood up from their seats, clapping, cheering, even shouting her name. Lily sat still for a second, her hands still on the keys, her heart pounding with disbelief. She had done it. She had played, not just for them, but for herself. Mr. Carter stood up too, though he didn't clap immediately. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, part shock, part pride, part guilt. Then slowly, he began to clap as well. The judges smiled and nodded toward her, clearly moved by what they had just witnessed. Lily stood up and bowed, softly. Her legs trembled, but her heart felt lighter than it ever had before. When she walked off the stage, the organizers congratulated her, saying her performance had saved the program. The audience's applause still echoed behind her as she stepped backstage. Mr. Carter met her there, his face still serious but softer than usual. He didn't say much, only that she had done well. His voice sounded quieter, less cold than before. She smiled faintly and thanked him. Inside, she knew that moment had changed something, not just for her but for him too. She sat alone for a while after that, listening to the next performances from behind the curtain. Her heart still raced, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from joy, relief, and pride. She had waited her whole life for a chance like this, and even though it came in an unexpected way, she had seized it. As the event ended and the crowd began to leave, people came up to her to congratulate her. Some of the other teachers praised her bravery. The audience members said her music touched their hearts. Mr. Carter stayed quiet most of the time, standing a few feet away, lost in thought. When the night ended and they returned to the bus, Lily looked out the window, watching the city lights pass. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure: she had found her strength. The girl who once sat quietly in the back of the hall was now the one who had silenced a whole crowd with her music. And though she didn't know it yet, this performance would not just change how people saw her, it would change how Mr. Carter saw her too. From that day on, he would never look at her the same way again. The hall was filled with soft murmurs and the sound of nervous whispers. The air carried a mix of excitement and pressure. It was the national competition that many young musicians had waited for all year. The lights were bright, the judges were serious, and every performer wanted to leave their mark. In one corner of the backstage area sat the quiet girl who had been replaced only minutes earlier. Her hands were still resting on her lap, and her eyes were fixed on the floor. Her name was Lily. She tried to hold back her tears as she listened to the sound of the piano coming from the stage. That sound was supposed to be hers, that spotlight was supposed to shine on her, but her coach had decided she wasn't ready. He said she was too emotional, too soft, and not confident enough. So now she was sitting there, watching someone else play the same song she had practiced for months. Mr. Carter, the coach, stood near the side curtains with his arms crossed. He watched his new student, a boy named Alan, play the piano. At first, Alan looked confident, but a few seconds later he missed a note. Then another. The hall grew silent. The judges looked up, surprised. Alan's hands began to shake. His breathing grew faster and his mind went blank. The piece that Lily had practiced so perfectly was falling apart on stage. Mr. Carter's face turned pale. He whispered something under his breath, something angry that Lily couldn't hear, but she could see the frustration in his movements. Alan stopped playing. His hands froze above the keys. The audience waited, hoping he would continue, but he didn't. The silence stretched for several long seconds until it became uncomfortable. Someone coughed in the crowd. The judges looked at each other, unsure what to do. Finally, the head judge leaned toward the microphone and asked if there was anyone else from the academy who could perform the solo. Mr. Carter hesitated. He knew the only person left who could play it was Lily. For a few seconds, he didn't move. His pride told him to say no, but deep down he knew that the competition would be lost if he didn't let her play. He turned his head slowly and looked at Lily sitting at the back. She was staring at her shoes, unaware that anyone was looking at her. "Lily," he said quietly at first, then louder. "Lily, come here." His voice made her lift her head. Everyone backstage turned to look at her. Her heart started pounding as she stood up, unsure what was happening. When she reached him, he looked into her eyes, his expression mixed with anger and worry. "You have to play," he said. "Get on the stage and play the piece." Lily froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She wanted to speak, but no words came out. She looked toward the stage where Alan was walking off with his head down. She felt sorry for him, but she also felt scared. This was her chance, the chance she had dreamed of. But she wasn't ready to be thrown on stage without a moment to breathe. "I can't," she whispered. But Mr. Carter didn't listen. He pushed her gently toward the stairs. "You can, and you will," he said in a low, serious voice. "Go now." Her legs felt weak as she walked toward the piano. The crowd began to murmur again. Some were confused, others were curious. They had seen her sitting in the back earlier. A few whispered, asking who she was. The judges looked at her papers and realized she was the original performer who had been replaced. Lily stood in front of the grand piano. The light hit her face, and for a moment, she couldn't see anything except the brightness and the outline of the keys. Her heart raced so fast it felt like it was echoing in her ears. Her palms were sweaty. She took a slow breath, then another. She sat down carefully, adjusted the seat, and placed her trembling fingers on the keyboard. The first few seconds felt like forever. Everything around her disappeared. The audience, the judges, even Mr. Carter. There was only her and the piano. Then she started to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but soon her hands began to remember what her heart already knew. The melody flowed naturally. Each note carried the emotion she had been holding inside for weeks. The sadness of being replaced, the pain of being told she wasn't good enough, and the quiet strength she had built through long nights of practice. All of it came out in her music. The hall slowly grew silent again, but this time it wasn't because of discomfort. It was because every person in the room was drawn to her sound. The way her fingers moved over the keys felt different. It wasn't perfect in a technical way, but it was full of emotion and truth. People in the audience leaned forward, caught in the story her music was telling. Even the judges, who had listened to dozens of performers that day, stopped writing notes and simply watched. Mr. Carter stood near the curtains, his face frozen. He had never seen Lily play like that. He had always told her to control her feelings, to focus on precision and strength. But what she was doing now was something else. It was real, raw, and beautiful. He realized that her strength had never been about power or speed. It was in the way she touched hearts without even trying. The final notes of her piece echoed softly across the hall. When the sound faded, there was silence for a moment. A deep, powerful silence that said more than words could. Then suddenly, the audience erupted into applause. People stood up from their seats, clapping loudly. Some even shouted her name. The judges smiled, nodding at each other. A few audience members had tears in their eyes. Lily sat still for a few seconds, unable to move. She didn't know whether to cry or smile. Her heart was racing, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from relief. She had done it. She had finally shown everyone, including herself, what she was capable of. Mr. Carter didn't move at first. His pride stopped him from reacting, but deep down, he felt something heavy in his chest. Guilt. He realized that his harsh words and lack of trust had almost destroyed her confidence. If Alan hadn't failed, Lily might never have been given this chance. He had underestimated her completely. When she stood up and bowed, the applause grew even louder. The judges called her name again and again. The host came on stage and said her performance had been one of the most emotional of the night. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she looked into the crowd and saw strangers cheering for her. As she walked off stage, Mr. Carter stepped forward. For a moment, they both looked at each other without speaking. He wanted to say something, but his voice didn't come out. Lily didn't wait. She just gave a small, polite smile and walked past him. She didn't do it out of anger. She was simply too full of emotion to speak. Backstage, some students ran to hug her. They couldn't believe how beautifully she had played. Even Alan, the boy who had replaced her, came forward. He looked down, embarrassed, but then said softly, "You were amazing. I'm sorry." Lily smiled gently and shook her head. "It's okay," she said. "You did your best." Later that night, when the winners were announced, Lily's name was called for the top prize in her category. The crowd cheered again as she went on stage to receive her award. Her hands trembled as she held the trophy. It wasn't about winning, for her. It was about finally being heard, about finding her place on that stage where she had always belonged. Mr. Carter clapped from the side, his eyes lowered. He couldn't stop thinking about how close he had come to silencing a true talent. He felt ashamed but also strangely proud. For the first time, he saw the kind of musician she really was. Not someone who played by the rules, but someone who played with her heart. After the event, people gathered around Lily for photos and interviews. She answered their questions with soft, humble words. When someone asked what made her play so beautifully, she said quietly, "I just played how I felt." Those simple words touched many hearts that night. When everything was over and the hall started to empty, Lily went back to the stage one last time. The lights were dim now, and the seats were mostly empty. She sat down at the piano again and played a few gentle notes just for herself. There was no pressure, no coach watching, no crowd judging, only her and the music. Mr. Carter stood at the door, watching her from afar. He didn't interrupt this time. He knew she didn't need his direction anymore. He had learned something that day, too. Sometimes a teacher's biggest mistake is not believing enough in their student. As Lily finished and stood up, she smiled to herself. The moment that had once felt like her biggest heartbreak had become her greatest victory. She had walked onto that stage scared and uncertain, but she left as someone stronger, someone who knew her worth. When she stepped outside into the cool night air, the city lights glowed softly in the distance. She took a deep breath, letting the sound of the evening settle around her. Somewhere inside, she still felt that quiet fire burning, the same one that had guided her hands on the piano. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing for sure. She would keep playing, not for approval, not for trophies, but for the love of music that had always been her true voice. When Lily stepped off the stage that night, her hands were still shaking. The sound of applause echoed in her ears like a dream that refused to fade away. Every cheer, every clap, every smile from the audience felt unreal. For months she had imagined this moment in her mind, but she never thought it would feel like this, warm, heavy, and full of meaning. It was not just victory, it was freedom. She had carried so much silence inside her heart, so much doubt, and now all of it had melted away under those bright lights. Backstage, everyone seemed to be talking at once. Other students from different schools came to congratulate her. Some hugged her even though they barely knew her. They told her that her music had touched them, that it made them feel something deep inside. She didn't know what to say except thank you, because words didn't seem enough to explain what had just happened. From that day forward, she practiced with renewed energy. Every morning she arrived early and every evening she stayed late. She wanted to give her best, not for the sake of a trophy, but because she wanted to honor the opportunity she had been given. Her parents were proud beyond words. They watched her practice every evening at home, smiling quietly as her fingers danced over the keys. The sound filled their small apartment with warmth. Even the neighbors sometimes paused outside their door just to listen. Weeks turned into months, and the day of her scholarship audition came closer. It was held in a large hall in the city, filled with students from different schools, all gifted, all nervous. When she arrived, she saw the grand piano in the center of the stage, the same kind of piano that had once frightened her. But this time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. Before her turn, she sat quietly in a corner, eyes closed, listening to the sound of others playing. She could hear talent in every note, but instead of feeling small, she felt inspired. She realized that music wasn't a competition of who played better. It was a conversation, one musician speaking to another through sound. When her name was finally called, she walked onto the stage calmly. The lights were bright again, but now they didn't blind her. They felt warm, familiar, almost like an old friend. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play her piece. The same one she had written herself after the competition, the one that told her story. The hall grew silent almost instantly. Every note seemed to paint a picture of her journey. The moments of doubt, the pain of being replaced, the quiet strength that had brought her here, and the joy of finally being free to play. By the time she reached the final notes, there was a kind of peaceful stillness in the air. When the sound faded, the judges looked at her with soft, thoughtful eyes. Then came the applause, warm, steady, and genuine. A few days later, she received the letter. It said she had been selected for the scholarship. She read it twice before she could believe it. Her parents hugged her tightly, tears of happiness in their eyes. Even Mr. Carter, who rarely showed emotions, smiled when she told him. "I knew you'd make it," he said. "Now, make us proud." The following months were filled with preparations for the international event. She practiced different styles, studied with new teachers, and learned about composers she had never known before. Every lesson taught her something new, not just about music, but about herself. She learned that real growth happens when you step outside your comfort zone, and that every failure is just a hidden step towards something greater. When the day of the international competition finally came, she traveled with her coach and a small team from the academy. The event was held in a huge auditorium filled with people from all around the world. The air was thick with excitement and tension. As she looked around, she saw so many talented faces, each one with their own story. She realized that every one of them had probably faced their own battles to get here. Her turn came late in the evening. As she waited backstage, she could hear the faint sound of the audience clapping for the performer before her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, remembering everything that had brought her here. The harsh words, the night she almost didn't play, the applause that changed everything, and the quiet faith that had kept her moving forward. When she opened her eyes again, she felt calm. She walked out to the center of the stage, bowed politely, and sat at the piano. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys. The moment she started to play, the world around her disappeared. It was as if she was alone again in her small room, just her and the piano. The sound flowed like water, pure and natural. She didn't think about winning or impressing anyone. She just played honestly, letting her heart speak the way it always had. The melody filled the hall, soft at first, then growing stronger and brighter. By the time she reached the final note, the hall was completely silent. Then, just like before, the applause came, not sudden but building, spreading through the audience like a wave of warmth. When she stood up and bowed, she saw people rising from their seats. Some were clapping, others were smiling, and a few had tears in their eyes. It felt like the night she had found her courage all over again. Mr. Carter was standing near the side of the stage, his hands together in a rare gesture of pride. She could see him smiling, and that made her heart swell with gratitude. She didn't win the first prize that night, another performer did, but when she stepped off the stage, it didn't matter to her. She had already won something much bigger. She had proven to herself that she was enough, that she didn't need anyone's approval to shine. When the results were announced, people still came to congratulate her. Many said her performance had touched them the most, even if she hadn't taken home the top trophy. After the event, as the crowd started to leave, she stayed behind for a while. The stage was empty now, the lights softer. She walked back to the piano and touched the keys gently, smiling. Mr. Carter joined her and said, "You didn't just play music today. You told your story. That's what true artists do." She looked at him with gratitude and replied softly, "You taught me discipline, but I learned courage on my own." He nodded with a smile that carried pride and respect. When they returned
home, the academy welcomed her like a hero. Students cheered, teachers congratulated her, and even the principal gave her a special award for representing the school so gracefully. But what touched her the most was the way the younger students
looked at her, not with envy but with admiration. They saw her not as someone unreachable, but as someone who had started just like them, someone who had struggled and risen again. In the months that followed, she began helping her coach with younger students. She guided them gently, always with kindness. She told them not to fear mistakes and not to let anyone's doubts silence their dreams. Every time she saw a shy student hesitate before playing, she remembered herself on that stage long ago and smiled. Her story spread far beyond the academy. It was shared in newspapers, online videos, and music magazines. People called her the girl who turned failure into music. But to her, it was never about fame. It was about truth. She had simply done what she loved, and that love had carried her farther than she ever imagined. One evening, years later, she stood once again on a stage, this time not as a student, but as a performer with her own name shining on the banner. The hall was full. The same hall where she had once been, replaced and then redeemed. She sat at the piano and looked out at the crowd. Somewhere among them, she saw Mr. Carter sitting quietly in the front row. He was older now, his hair grayer, but his eyes were still sharp. When their eyes met, he nodded slowly, and she smiled. Then, she began to play. The same melody, the one that had changed her life years ago. The hall filled with the sound of her heart once again. The story of a girl who was once told she wasn't ready, who was pushed aside, but who found her strength through her music. The same sound that had once silenced a crowd now lifted it to its feet. When the performance ended, the applause was thunderous. People stood up, clapping and cheering, and in that moment, Lily knew she had come full circle. The little girl who once sat in the back of the hall had finally found her place in the center of it. She didn't need to say anything. The music had already spoken for her, and as the lights dimmed and the echoes of the applause faded away, she looked up at the piano one last time, her eyes soft and full of peace. She knew she had lived her dream, not because she had won, but because she had played with all her heart, and in the end, that was everything that truly mattered. From that day forward, she practiced with renewed energy. Every morning she arrived early, and every evening she stayed late. She wanted to give her best, not for the sake of a trophy, but because she wanted to honor the opportunity she had been given. Her parents were proud beyond words. They watched her practice every evening at home, smiling quietly as her fingers danced over the keys. The sound filled their small apartment with warmth. Even the neighbors sometimes paused outside their door just to listen. Weeks turned into months, and the day of her scholarship audition came closer. It was held in a large hall in the city, filled with students from different schools, all gifted, all nervous. When she arrived, she saw the grand piano in the center of the stage, the same kind of piano that had once frightened her. But this time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. Before her turn, she sat quietly in a corner, eyes closed, listening to the sound of others playing. She could hear talent in every note, but instead of feeling small, she felt inspired. She realized that music wasn't a competition of who played better. It was a conversation, one musician speaking to another through sound. When her name was finally called, she walked onto the stage calmly. The lights were bright again, but now they didn't blind her. They felt warm, familiar, almost like an old friend. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play her piece. The same one she had written herself after the competition, the one that told her story. The hall grew silent almost instantly. Every note seemed to paint a picture of her journey, the moments of doubt, the pain of being replaced, the quiet strength that had brought her here, and the joy of finally being free to play. By the time she reached the final notes, there was a kind of peaceful stillness in the air. When the sound faded, the judges looked at her with soft, thoughtful eyes. Then came the applause, warm, steady, and genuine. A few days later, she received the letter. It said she had been selected for the scholarship. She read it twice before she could believe it. Her parents hugged her tightly, tears of happiness in their eyes. Even Mr. Carter, who rarely showed emotion, smiled when she told him. "I knew you'd make it," he said. "Now make us proud." The following months were filled with preparations for the international event. She practiced different styles, studied with new teachers, and learned about composers she had never known before. Every lesson taught her something new, not just about music, but about herself. She learned that real growth happens when you step outside your comfort zone, and that every failure is just a hidden step toward something greater. When the day of the international competition finally came, she traveled with her coach and a small team from the academy. The event was held in a huge auditorium filled with people from all around the world. The air was thick with excitement and tension. As she looked around, she saw so many talented faces, each one with their own story. She realized that every one of them had probably faced their own battles to get here. Her turn came late in the evening. As she waited backstage, she could hear the faint sound of the audience clapping for the performer before her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, remembering everything that had brought her here. The harsh words, the night she almost didn't play, the applause that changed everything and the quiet faith that had kept her moving forward. When she opened her eyes again, she felt calm. She walked out to the center of the stage, bowed politely, and sat at the piano. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys. The moment she started to play, the world around her disappeared. It was as if she was alone again in her small room, just her and the piano. The sound flowed like water, pure and natural. She didn't think about winning or impressing anyone. She just played honestly, letting her heart speak the way it always had. The melody filled the hall, soft at first, then growing stronger and brighter. By the time she reached the final note, the hall was completely silent. Then, just like before, the applause came. Not sudden, but building, spreading through the audience like a wave of warmth. When she stood up and bowed, she saw people rising from their seats. Some were clapping, others were smiling, and a few had tears in their eyes. It felt like the night she had found her courage all over again. Mr. Carter was standing near the side of the stage, his hands together in a rare gesture of pride. She could see him smiling, and that made her heart swell with gratitude. She didn't win the first prize that night, another performer did. But when she stepped off the stage, it didn't matter to her. She had already won something much bigger. She had proven to herself that she was enough, that she didn't need anyone's approval to shine. When the results were announced, people still came to congratulate her. Many said her performance had touched them the most, even if she hadn't taken home the top trophy. After the event, as the crowd started to leave, she stayed behind for a while. The stage was empty now, the lights softer. She walked back to the piano and touched the keys gently, smiling. Mr. Carter joined her and said, "You didn't just play music today, you told your story. That's what true artists do." She looked at him with gratitude and replied softly, "You taught me discipline, but I learned courage on my own." He nodded with a smile that carried pride and respect. When they returned home, the academy welcomed her like a hero. Students cheered, teachers congratulated her, and even the principal gave her a special award for representing the school so gracefully. But what touched her the most was the way the younger students looked at her, not with envy but with admiration. They saw her not as someone unreachable, but as someone who had started just like them, someone who had struggled and risen again. In the months that followed, she began helping her coach with younger students. She guided them gently, always with kindness. She told them not to fear mistakes and not to let anyone's doubt silence their dreams. Every time she saw a shy student hesitate before playing, she remembered herself on that stage long ago and smiled. Her story spread far beyond the academy. It was shared in newspapers, online videos, and music magazines. People called her the girl who turned failure into music. But to her, it was never about fame. It was about truth. She had simply done what she loved, and that love had carried her farther than she ever imagined. One evening, years later, she stood once again on a stage, this time not as a student, but as a performer with her own name shining on the banner. The hall was full, the same hall where she had once been, replaced and then redeemed. She sat at the piano and looked out at the crowd. Somewhere among them, she saw Mr. Carter sitting quietly in the front row. He was older now, his hair grayer, but his eyes were still sharp. When their eyes met, he nodded slowly, and she smiled. Then she began to play. The same melody, the one that had changed her life years ago. The hall filled with the sound of her heart once again, the story of a girl who was once told she wasn't ready, who was pushed aside, but who found her strength through her music. The same sound that had once silenced a crowd now lifted it to its feet. When the performance ended, the applause was thunderous. People stood up, clapping and cheering, and in that moment, Lily knew she had come full circle. The little girl who once sat in the back of the hall had finally found her place in the center of it. She didn't need to say anything. The music had already spoken for her, and as the lights dimmed and the echoes of the applause faded away, she looked up at the piano one last time, her eyes soft and full of peace. She knew she had lived her dream, not because she had won, but because she had played with all her heart. And in the end, that was everything that truly mattered.